So in the previous videos, we talked about how to use some basic VB functions, the basic structure of a script, and in this video, and we covered how to read files, right? So how to read and write files. So now you should have a good understanding of how we can read and write files and read the contents of files. So in the next couple videos, in this video we're going to talk about UltraDICOM, and then I'm going to talk about using HL7, so how to read and write HL7. And then finally, we're going to talk about databases. So in this video, let's talk about UltraDICOM. So UltraDICOM is obviously the toolkit that we have as part of our suite here at UltraRad that can read and write DICOM tags. Well, there's a lot of other things you can do with it, but what I'm going to show you is how to read DICOM tags and set DICOM tags, because this is the most common thing that we do with that library. Like I said, there's other things you can do, and if you open up Visual Studio, you can see all these other functions that you can call and use in UltraDICOM. But let's take a look first. So as far as where is UltraDICOM, if you go into your Ultra Workflow bin directory, you should have some UltraDICOM DLLs. And we're going to need some of these DLLs, right? So interop UltraDICOM lib, there's also an UltraDICOM DLL, and so forth. The one that we are going to need, though, that we're going to include with our script is the interop UltraDICOM lib. So UltraDICOM is, I believe it's a C++ DLL, and then the interop DLL is what allows us to use .NET with that library. So it has all the functionality for using .NET with UltraDICOM. So the first step is we have to add this reference to our script. We can't use the DLL unless we tell the script where it is or that we're trying to use it. So we have to add it here. So I'm going to paste in the path, and then I'm also going to paste in the name of the file. So it's going to be interop ultradicom lib.dll. All right, so now I save my workflow description now that we have this reference in our file. I also changed the period of my script to 300. We had it set till 10 before. I increased it to 300. That way we're not writing out huge log files. We can just start and stop the service whenever we're trying to do something. So let's go back to the template that we were working on. So in order to work with DICOM files, the first thing is you're going to need a DICOM file. So what I did is I just grabbed some DICOM files, and I'm going to drop them into this in directory. Right? So here's my file in. I added 2 DICOM files. And if we double click and look at it, you can see it's just a basic DICOM image. So here's a data set. And we're just going to work with maybe the patient name and the patient ID. So if I scroll down to tag 1010 and 1020. There we go. So my patient name is PS Test 1. The ID number is 0001, right? All right. So going back to my script. So the first step, if we're going to use UltraDICOM, there's some stuff we have to start with. And I don't want to get into too much detail on what exactly this stuff means. But so I'm going to paste some stuff in here. So in order to use UltraDICOM, you're always going to want to have this code in your script. I usually just put it right where after I declare the class, I usually just put it right at the top of the script. So you can see here there's a log path where UltraDICOM will log errors. I don't know if this actually works, but it's there. I mean, I guess I always just put it in here because that's how I've always seen it. And then we create an object, right? So we're going to create an object called REST DSM. And it's going to use that DLL that we referenced in our before. We have to create these two arrays, tags and values. They're going to get used by our by some functions that we're going to use, right? So we've learned how to write functions, and I'm going to give you a copy of some functions here that you can use. And then public constant DICOM success, we're going to set that to 0. That's just a variable more or less. But that has to be here as well. Now, in order to use UltraDICOM, so one of the idiosyncrasies with UltraDICOM is you have to reference the tags using an integer rather than, we're used to reading tags as hexadecimal, but the library is going to need it to be as an integer. So we're going to create, just to make it easier, we're going to create a variable which is an integer, right? And I'm just going to name it the tag number that I want it to be. And the value of that is going to be the integer that is this tag number. So what does this %h mean? That means set this integer to the whatever is the equivalent of this hexadecimal number. In this case, 100010 is the DICOM tag for patient name, right? 00, where we're used to seeing it is 0010, comma 0010, but written as just a plain hexadecimal number. We can drop the leading zeros. It's 100010. So that's going to be the DICOM tag. So it's going to, now theoretically, you could get out your calculator and convert tag 1010 into an integer and just set it equal to the actual integer. But who wants to sit there with a calculator? Let VB do it for us. So that's how we're going to do that. I'm also going to put in here, we'll do one for the patient ID as well, which is just tag 1020. Right? So tag 1010 and 1020. So this is the first part. You're going to need to add this to your script that you see here. So you might want to pause the video and go ahead and type that into your script. And then we're going to need some other stuff as well. All right, so we're going to need some functions. And so all the way at the bottom of my script, I'm going to add a new function. So I just pasted it in. This is it right here. This is the set DICOM function. You can probably find a copy of this laying around, but if not, if you don't have a copy of it, you can pause the video and just copy what I've put here. Just be careful not to get any typos. And there's another one as well. So we're going to have two additional functions, these two right here. We're going to have a function for setting DICOM values and a function for getting DICOM values. So we're going to have these two different functions. We're going to call these functions to do things. Now, theoretically, you don't have to use a function, right? We could have just, I could have just taught you through how to do this directly, with these function calls. But it's certainly a lot easier to coalesce this code into a function, so we can just, in our code, we don't have to worry about how we're getting and setting DICOM values. We can just call these functions to do it for us. All right, so, and you'll notice too, I don't know why, but in this function on the top, it passes in the, oh no, that's a DICOM value. Yeah, we're good. We could add an additional parameter here for vlog if we wanted to add logging to these. But for right now, you don't have to worry about that. We don't really need logging in these because they usually work. But if you did want to add logging, you certainly could. Just like we did in our other functions, you could add by val vlog, so you could pass vlog into these functions. All right, so hopefully you've got these typed into your script file. Obviously if you mistype something, you'll get a compile error, and you'll just have to check and see what you got wrong and rewind the video to see what happened. So if you wanted to, right now you could save this. You can still run this script even though we haven't used Ultra DICOM. We can still run the script to see if there's any compile errors, just to make sure. So if you want to do that, you can go ahead and pause the video, run your script, and make sure there's no compile errors in here, and then go back and fix this. But assuming you've done that, now we're going to be ready to start trying some stuff with our, with Ultra DICOM. So let me scroll back up here. So I'm just going to leave the code that's in here already, right? So before we played with how to get a host name, we played with getting a current date and time. We also, oh whoops, I added this log event earlier. You won't have that when I was playing around. But we also read the directory and then did some stuff with some text files, right? So now below this, we are going to, and I'm just going to back up a copy of this before we get too far, so we have a copy of it. And you should probably do the same, right? So make sure you back up a copy of these script files as you go. That way you have a copy laying around in case you need to revert back. So just below at the bottom of this, I'm just going to go ahead and do some experimenting here. So first, we've already declared the mrest DICOM variable, right? So now we're going to use it. We're going to create an instance of the mrest DICOM, or DCM, and then we are going to create an object from that. So we're going to create an object using Ultra DICOM. And again, it's not too important to know exactly how this works, but I just want you to see the basic syntax that you're going to need. Now I'm going to paste in a whole bunch of stuff that you don't necessarily need. So this line you do need, right? So you have to initialize Ultra DICOM, right? So you're going to need this line. These are options that you can set. So this turns on the logging, it turns debug to true. But again, you don't have to, and this also sets the compression engine if you're going to be changing the DICOM data. And I just wanted to show you what it looks like to set these options, but you do not actually need to have those. So the only thing that you need to type into your script file is the first 3 lines that you see here. And then, of course, this is optional as well. This just tells you that UltraDICOM has started, right? We've created that UltraDICOM object, and we're starting to use that UltraDICOM object. So next, to actually use that DICOM object, we're going to need to go get a DICOM file, right, and open it with UltraDICOM. So to do that, we're going to create. So let me type this in here. So we're going to create an integer. So this is going to be an integer that's going to be either true or false, right? 1 or 0. I guess it should be Boolean, but this is what DICOM, the UltraDICOM returns. So we're going to be using this mrest DCM object, and we are going to open that. All right. So we open up our, so what are we going to open? We're going to open a file. Now I had earlier, and we just pass in the file name to open it. I had earlier, there we go, there's our files. I put them in file in. So I'm just going to do this by pasting in the path for right now. And we'll look at file number 1.dcm. So we're going to play around with file number 1. So once we open it, so the next step is we want to check to see if UltraDICOM was able to successfully open that file. If it's not a valid DICOM file, there's no use in doing anything with that file. So this is where we're going to use this integer. We're going to check to see if it is DICOM underscore success. Now where did that come from? DICOM success? That's just a variable that we declared up here. So 0 means that it's success. Any other number means something went wrong, and you could probably go look up some error code to see what went wrong. But that's all we're doing here. We're checking to see if it's equal to DICOM success. And if it is, now we can start working with that file. So for example, let's say we wanted to output the patient name. So first I'm going to create a variable called patient name, and that's going to be a string. And we are going to get the DICOM value, and this is just a function, right? So this is one of the functions I copied. So here it is down here, and it's expecting a DICOM tag as an integer, right? So we have to pass that integer DICOM tag. Well, where am I going to get the integer DICOM tag? If you recall, we already set it up here. So there's my patient name DICOM tag. I don't have to try to calculate what it is. We already set that integer. Now, theoretically, could I just type in here the integer that's equivalent to tag 1010? Yeah, you could. You don't necessarily have to use a variable, but now it's a little more obvious to somebody looking at the script that this is reading the value from tag 1010. So it's definitely good practice to do it this way. So that should get the variable for tag 1010, and then just to see if we have the patient name, we're going to output that in the log file. Okay, so that should output the patient's name in our log file. And just to show you how it works, I'm going to set that tag, right? So I get the tag. Now I'm going to set that tag's value with new name, just static, just new name, right? So here's another function, right? This is the function that we created down here. We're passing in the DICOM tag as an integer, and then the value that we want to set that DICOM tag to, which is going to be a string. Okay? So there's the new value, which is a string. There's our DICOM tag, which is an integer. Next, we're going to save it, right? So there, just like there's a mrest.open. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably .save, right? That'd probably be a pretty good guess. And the path that I want to save it to is the argument. So we're just going to set this to a path to which we want to save that file. And I'm just going to call it test1_new. So it'll create a new file called test1_new. Now I could have just left it as test1 and it would overwrite the existing file. But I don't want to do that in this case because I want to keep that old file. I will warn you that in the real world when you're using UltraDICOM, one of the issues we've encountered is that if you try to set the same file, right? If you read in the file path and then you try to write back out to the exact same file path, sometimes it'll work, but sometimes we have issues with that. Like if it fails or something, you might have some unexpected behavior. So we usually try to save it into a temp path, right? So we'll call it test1.tmp or something like that. And then we'll do a file.move. We'll delete the old version of the file and then do a move to the new file name, right? So we read in the old file, we manipulate the old file, save it as a temp, then delete the old file if that save worked. I'm going to show you how to check that in a second. So if the save works, then we're going to go ahead and delete the old version and then rename the new version to replace it. And if it didn't work, we're going to keep that temp in place and keep the old one in place so we have it. So that's kind of typical. I feel like I should just show you how to do that. Let's just go ahead and do that here. So I would just do, let's just call this test1.tmp. Right, so we're going to call it test1.tmp, and then we're going to check to see if it's saved, right? So if dcm error equals dicom success, right? In other words, it whatever operation it just did it work? And if it is successful, then we are going to do a file.delete. And I'm going to comment this out because I don't want to actually delete that file. But we'll do a file.delete. We're going to delete the original version. Like this. And then we do a file.move. And we pass 2 arguments for file.move. We're going to pass the old file name. And then we would pass in the new file name, which is going to be this one, right? Because we're replacing that file. So all we're doing is deleting the original file and then taking our temp, moving that in to our to rename it, right? Move basically is going to rename. And then when that's done, we're going to delete our temp file, which we don't want to forget to do, because if we forget to delete that, we'll have a whole bunch of temp files sitting around. Right, so that'll replace that. Now the problem here is I don't want to do any of this because I just want to keep what I have. So I'm going to comment these out. I just wanted to put it in so you could see it. And instead, I'm just going to log out a log line. So let's do this. We're going to do, we all remember how to do logging, but let's see. We're just going to do... Actually, you know what? I'm going to keep the move in here. What I'll do is I'll move it from test1.tmp to test1_new, like that. And then I'll output in the log that we saved the file as .new. We'll call the thread IO for disk IO, maybe. I don't know, I'm just making it up. And 0 for information. All right, but if it didn't work, right? So if this failed, then we are going to put a log entry in here that says that something went wrong. So we'll change this to failed. And we'll plug this in. There we go. And notice here, I'm going to change this to a 2, indicating that there was an error. All right, that's it. I have to close this end if. So what I should be able to do now, so all this other stuff is still going to run that's up here at the top. I wanted you to leave that in place so you have some template there to work with in a little bit. But let's go ahead and restart the service and see what happens. So I'm going to stop the service, and we are going to, my script is called, in my workflow descriptions, I called it sample. And let's see, I'm also going to turn this on, which is going to show me my any compile errors that come up. All right, so let's go ahead and start the workflow service. And I'm going to keep an eye out for any compile errors or new log entries. Okay, service is running. So we've got some compile errors. N object is not declared and DCM error is not declared. So that's on line 68 and 81. So on line 68, oh, it's supposed to be N object. There we go. And really, like I said before, we don't really need this. So I'm going to comment all this out just so you can see that we don't really need that stuff. I just wanted to show you what it does. But I just had a little misspelling right here. That's why it was throwing an error. Let's stop the workflow service. And then, and the reason I commented those out and not delete them is because, and this is important for troubleshooting, now I'm going to look at line 81. Line 81 would be wrong, right? I wouldn't know where that is, so it's easier just to comment it out, and I can delete it later once I have the script stable. So DCM error is, oh, I forgot to put the L underscore in front of this. So that was easy. So assuming I got all that right, we should see some log entries over here, unless we get another compile error. So let's see what happens. Ah, here we go. So it output the patient name, it's PS test 1, and then it saved the file, right? So there it is. The file was saved. So if I go and look at our file in, there's my old version of the file. My new one, it should just say new name. And there it is. It's just the new name, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now going back to the script, what I've shown you is you should now have the basics for creating or using Ultra DICOM, because you've added the Ultra DICOM stuff to the top of the script right after you declared the class. You've added these functions down here to set and get DICOM values. Based on what I've shown you so far, what I'd like you to do is pause the video and try to write your own script. You can just copy this one to write a new script, and instead of reading the file, instead of passing in the file name, right? So taking a look down here, here we passed in that full file name. Instead, try to loop through that directory, and as you loop through all the DICOM objects, well, I want you to do two things. I want you to read in read the patient ID instead of the patient name, right? So get the patient ID, output it to a log line, okay? And then I want you to strip the leading zeros. And how are you going to do that? We already wrote a function to do that, right? So here was an example. Let me find it here. Oh, there it is. So here's an example of how we trim the patient ID with those leading zeros. So you have an example here of how to do that. So let me write up the instructions here. So first, you're going to loop through all DCM files in the file in directory, right? Which we already know how to do. You've already looped through files. It's just before it was text files. Now you want to loop through DICOM files. And then for each of those DICOM files, okay, so for each DICOM file, read the patient ID, which is tag 1020, which you probably already know, right? And then we're going to set 1020, or actually, well, we're going to trim leading zeros. And set it to the new value, right? So trim those leading zeros and set to the new value. Save your DICOM file into file underscore out, right? So instead of saving it to file in, just save it to file out, and that's it. So you're going to read it from file in, edit the patient ID by stripping the leading zeros, and then you're going to write the file out to file out, and then that's it. And see if you can get that done. So pause the video, and then when you come back, I'll show you the solution. Okay, hopefully you're back and you're ready to look at the solution here that I came up with. So give me 1 second. Let me bring it up on screen for you. Okay, so this is my solution. So obviously all this stuff is the same. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because we know we don't need it, right? This isn't really being used. I'm just giving you an example with that. So in any event, let's see. So in my script, there's the reading the directory. Here I'm checking for all the DCM files, right? So we're looping through DCM files. When I find a file, I'm outputting just the file name, right? We did this before, so I'm just going to output the file name. So L-file has the full path, but I just want to show what the file name is instead of the full path. Then I try to open the DICOM file with this line, just like we did in the other script, just like I showed you before. And if that works, if it's able to open it, I'm going to get the patient ID using the get DICOM value. Then I'm going to write out the patient ID so we can see it. Then I'm going to set the DICOM value by passing in the DICOM tag for patient ID. I'm going to call that trim PID function and pass in the patient ID. And I also have to pass in vlog, right, because we passed that through in case we needed it. And then finally, I'm going to save it to file out, right, so I can put that path in there and then just output the file name that I want to use. Now, theoretically, I probably could have just used output path, so let me change that, right, because it's probably best practice to use our variable names. I don't know why I put it in like that. So that's going to use our output path and our file name, pass in our just the file name, right? I don't want to pass the full path because I'm concatenating output path to that instead. And if it works, then we are going to output, and again, I probably should just put the variable here. I don't know why I put output path. There we go. So if it works, it'll output that it worked, and if it fails, it'll output that it failed. Notice I didn't really play with the incantations of moving and deleting files and so forth. I just just created that new file in the new directory. I didn't need a temp file, right? I'm just directly writing it because I'm going from one location to another, not in the same folder trying to edit the same file. It's pretty short, right? It's only from line 26 to 46, right? That's, not that many lines, right? So, well, 20 lines. So it's pretty simple. Really not much to that. So let me go ahead and stop my workflow service. Now I haven't tried to run this yet, so let's see if we get any compile errors here. Oh, it's still starting. There we go. All right, so it ran, right? So it found the patient ID 001, saved the new file, then it found the next one, which is also 01, saved that. If you recall, I had 2 of those files in there, and then it got to number 2 and saved that one. Now, the patient ID for file 2 is 000002, and the patient ID was 0001 for the other 2 files. So if I did this right, let's go to file out. Assuming this worked, if I look at the patient ID in here, right, so we're going to scroll down. It should be just the number 1 because all the leading zero, there we go, the leading zeros are gone, right? And just for the heck of it, we'll check file number 2 as well. There it is. It's just the number 2. Easy peasy, right? So that was pretty straightforward. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to do HL7. But before I do that, I wanted to show you one other thing because sometimes this is useful for troubleshooting. You can see I've got Ultra Worklist client in here. You're probably wondering why I did that. In workflow descriptions, if you change your workflow description to a 2, right? So if you run it, if you set it as a 2, then this workflow script will only run when called by Ultra Broker. So let me restart the service here. And you'll notice that I restart the service and I don't see any logs over here. Well, let's wait for it to start. All right, so you'll notice that nothing's happening over here, right? It's not actually running anything. And if I come back over to, and let me go in here and delete my file outs, just so you can see if it works if we do this. So I'm going to open up Ultra Broker. So there's this feature in Ultra Broker that we don't use a whole lot, but I wanted to expose you to it. You can point Ultra Broker to Ultra Workflow. You put this URL in, and if you're wondering where that URL comes from, and it doesn't have to be localhost, by the way. You could use the actual host name or the IP address if it's on a different machine, your broker. But in the workflow descriptions, which I don't have open, but in the workflow, not workflow descriptions, in the XML for Ultra Workflow, the Ultra Workflow config rather. Oh, here we go. So let me open up Ultra Workflow config. Right. So this is the config file for Ultra Workflow, and if I scroll down, this is the web service, right? The web service URL. So there's a web service listening in Ultra Broker, which you can call, or I'm sorry, Ultra Workflow, which you can call from Ultra Broker. There's the path. And when you hit this little button down here that says Enable Workflow Processing, there's my script. It shows up in the drop-down. So you can bind a AE title, in this case testing. I have the testing AE title bound to run that script. Now you can pass in, so when that script runs, you can pass in all of the information in the cfind. I didn't want to show you that in this video, but later on, we could do another video where we talk about how that works. There are certainly some examples laying around if you wanted to see how to do that. But that allows you to capture information in the cfind, do something with a workflow script, and then return control to the broker. So instead of running periodically, it just runs whenever you get a query. But the cool thing about this, about doing it this way, is the workflow script runs every time you hit Ultra, every time you do a query against the broker, right? So let me close this and open up my, so this is my work list tool. I'm just going to do a DICOM query using this work list tool, right? So if I hit find, look what happens over here. It ran the script, right? So by hitting find, it runs the script every time, right? The cool thing about this, in some systems, I don't know if it's going to work here, but in some systems, when I do this, I can make changes to this workflow script. Yeah, I can't do it on this one, but in some systems, it'll let you make changes to the workflow script, and then you can do a cfind to trigger the script again, and it will recompile it each time. So you can make changes without having to restart the service, which is kind of cool. So it saves you a little bit of time. But it's also good if you don't want it to just run all the time and you're doing some troubleshooting, you can do it this way. But I also wanted you to see that configuration exists, and you can see that it did actually run, and there's my files in the output. All right, so we've done some stuff here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step, which is going to be Ultra HL7, which I'm going to do in the next video.